Good afternoon, and welcome to Facebook Live with the Kansas City Star Editorial Board. I'm Toriano Porter. In 1989, 5 African-American teens were accused in a brutal rape of a jogger in New York Central Park. The teens, collectively known as the Central Park Five, were not only wrongly accused, but were wrongly convicted in a case that would garner national attention then and decades later with the release of the Netflix movie When They See Us. Today, I am joined by colleague Dave Helling of the KC Star Editorial Board and special guest, Dr. Yusef Salaam, one of the exonerated Central Park Five. Yusef, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on your show.
Right. Now, recently, the movie When They See Us came out. It highlighted your case. Back in 1989, when you were going through that, did you ever think you would be in a position where you would be able to get out and tell your story?
Absolutely not. It was one of those things where it was like, man, my life is over. The only thing that was missing was that I was still living, but the truth is that I was hiding in plain sight. Having to go forward in life with this indelible scar was a tremendous feat. And, one of the things that we all realized was that we were given more than just a 5 to 10 or 5 to 15-year prison bid. We were really given a death sentence that had we somehow survived, we wouldn't be able to survive socially. That was the expectation of what the effect of what we were under was.
Right. And I have to ask you, as you were going through this process, how were you and the other guys, and I know you guys have talked a lot, how have you guys were able to keep your mental mind state and keep that faith that one day justice would be served?
One of the most important things that I always tell people, especially when you're going through something, is that you're really growing through something. This right here may be seen as you walking through fire, but how do you get through that? Like Churchill said, keep on walking. Being able to envision the truth coming out sometime in the future, being able to envision your life being fully restored gave us tremendous hope. We were able to see that light at the end of the tunnel. And oftentimes I tell people that I had to meditate often. I prayed every day. I prayed all the time. But when I coupled that with meditation and I began to believe the truth, that I was going to one day be free, that I was going to one day be able to come out from underneath this oppression, then it gave me tremendous hope in building and putting my life back together. It's one of those things that I say nowadays, that when you are seeing what we are seeing in the world and you collectively reattach it, almost like Etch-a-Sketch or connecting the dots, being able to understand how this plays out and how all of these things work together to really push systemic oppression on us as a people.
Right. Now, it's widely known that the current president of the United States took out a 4-page ad back then calling for the Central Park Five to receive the death penalty, basically be put to death. What was your thoughts as Donald Trump was running for president and then actually became president?
I think I was like everyone else in the world, probably believed and thought, nah, this is another reality show. This isn't really going to happen. And all of a sudden, they hired the reality star as the chief executive officer of these United States. And I got to tell you, since that time, we have been experiencing collectively the hashtag This Is America. Especially with what's been going on lately, as the whole world is outcrying things like Black Lives Matter, as people are able to see the exonerated five in the same, so to speak, light as we were called when this case first started 31 years ago. They said we were the modern day Scottsboro Boys. Looking at this ad that was placed in the city's newspapers in big bold headlines for the world to see. Really, it was a whisper. That ad that Donald Trump placed was a whisper into the darkest enclaves of society, hoping that someone would do to us what they had done to Emmett Till, who just had his birthday just the other day. And he's not here. He was 14 when he was brutally murdered.
Dave?
Dr. Salaam, thank you. Great honor to be on with you today, and we thank you for joining us. It's and a personal honor as well to chat with you today for this interview. All the attention that's been paid to the Central Park Five and the horror of that story does it serve, should it serve in your mind as a reminder that yours is not the only case involving people who are innocently accused and convicted, and many of whom are still in prison today? I mean, I think that your experience is a bit of a tale, cautionary tale, isn't it, for some of the challenges we face even today?
Absolutely. That's why I said we have to connect those dots, because to look at the Central Park jogger case as an anomaly discredits the experience that we as people of color have been having in on this land since we've been here. That oppression begins to rear its ugly head, and the truth about it when you realize that the 13th Amendment is a part of the founding documents of this country, that slavery would go on by another name because of the 13th Amendment. And then you look at the prison industrial complex, you look at the overwhelming majority, the landscape that is there, and you realize that this is where our uncles, our fathers, our cousins, our brothers, ourselves have gone. It paints a really ugly truth that we have to wrestle with right now.
Yeah, and while we all today understand the gross injustice done to you and the other members of the Central Park Five, 30 years ago that wasn't the case, was it? 30 years ago, everyone assumed you were guilty. I mean, that's literally almost true, isn't it, Dr. Salaam? That in the court of public opinion, if you will, it was just assumed that you had committed this heinous crime.
Well, that's the thing that we have to grapple with. Like right today, when we look at cases that are being pushed in front of us, are we going to rush to judge? Are we going to not do our service as citizens in this country and give the people who are being presented as criminals their fair share? We need to be able to look at the justice system in a manner that it was designed for, in that if a person is accused of a crime, they should be looked at as innocent until proven guilty in a court.
That wasn't the case in your case at all, was it?
That was absolutely not the case.
I mean, that's the story behind the Donald Trump ad, which he just assumed you were guilty.
Absolutely. But see that ad is actually saying something even more sinister. What people need to understand when they look at this ad is that this ad was ran 2 weeks after we were accused, not 2 weeks after we had gone to trial. 2 weeks after the accusation came out and we were vilified in the media, the wheels in the head of a Donald Trump began to spin. How can I use my money to affect the outcome of this case?
Right.
Wow.
And you see this big, bold ad with the big, bold words, bring back the death penalty, bring back our police. It is a wonder that we are still alive today, because that, like I said, what was being whispered into society was you should just do to them what you had done to Emmett Till. Pat Buchanan wrote in the papers a little while later. He said, well, listen, why don't we just take the eldest one, Corey Wise, and hang him from a tree in Central Park? Why don't we take the others and horsewhip them? Suggesting that this may make the city's park safe again, and that this should happen by June 1st.
Did anyone ever apologize for any of this? I mean, you obviously went through the process, you went to prison. Did Pat Buchanan, Donald Trump, did anyone ever come up and say, you know what, we got this wrong and we're sorry?
You know, the only folks that apologized were the media, the people who were frenzied up by thinking that we had done this, the common citizens of this country. We get all kinds of apologies all the time from them. But the key players, the prosecutors, the judge, folks like Donald Trump, folks like Pat Buchanan, they still stand on the wrong side, as if that is truth.
Yeah. I mean, I think, just quickly, Toriano, when we hear the phrase Black Lives Matter, it's so important to understand we're not just talking about life and death. We're talking about Black lives having the same access to equal protection, assumption of innocence, all the other things that most Americans take for granted. And your case is a perfect illustration of how, even if life did not become the ultimate concern here. You were denied just normal access to justice as any other citizen would be.
Absolutely. And we're talking about elevating, we're talking about adding to the most marginalized of those of us in society, bringing them up to the same level, like you said, as access, being able to give them the opportunity to truly appreciate the pursuit of happiness, to truly appreciate freedom, justice, and equality in these lands, and not to be the ones that are constantly seen as fodder that can be sent to the fire to be burned.
Dr. Salaam, what does this say about the American criminal justice system when 30 years after your case, African-American, Hispanic men and women are still being wrongfully accused and convicted?
The thing that it says about the American criminal justice system is that this system is actually not broken. We go back to the inception of we the people. If we go back to the inception of what it is that began America and how it all started and all of that, we realize something very, very dark. We realize this truth that people they don't want people to talk about. They don't want people to talk about the fact that there were the folks that were building the railroads. They don't want folks to talk about the fact that when they came here, there were already people here. Therefore, this land was not discovered, right? Mm-hmm. They don't want people to talk about the gentrifying of America when the people who were already there were established, were people who should have been given value, given access, honored. You know, right. We're looking at a system when what happened recently in Central Park. Unfortunately, when they cry, we die.
Absolutely. I had the honor of hosting a Kansas City Breaking Point, a conversation on tackling systemic racism here in the local area. When we start talking about breaking down and dismantling the system, what does that mean to you?
There's so many layers, because we have to then go back, and it's like a history lesson, but a true history lesson, right? Where we can't talk about poverty, for instance, without talking about redlining. I'm talking about like literally somebody taking out a red marker or a marker and saying, hey, let's just cut up this side of the town and put a railroad through there, put a highway through there, put this through there.
Yeah, we're familiar with that in Kansas City, Dr. Salaam. I mean, that's the story of Kansas City.
It happens all the time, and it happened to community. When you think about people on one side of the border now not being able to come to the dining room table of their families on the other side of the border, when just yesterday there was no border. You know, the fact that, you know, you look at all of these things and how it all plays a role in why we need things to change. We need change like we needed it yesterday. We need change like our lives depend on it. We need change so that the future of America can become the dream that Dr. King planted as seeds in the heart of all of us, so that we become the kaleidoscope of the human family, collectively moving forward together, arm in arm, hand in hand, talking about how we overcame, being able to appreciate this freedom that we all so desperately need and that some are denied.
Absolutely. Dr. Salaam, before COVID shut down large gatherings, you were scheduled to be in Kansas City here on July 30th, which is Thursday tomorrow.
Yes.
You're going to be the keynote speaker for the Midwest Innocence Project, Faces of Innocence. Like, we're literally looking at you as a face of innocence. What's going to be your message to the people that are going to virtually tune into that gala?
My message has always been a message of hope. It's always been a message of change. And really, most often, what I'm hoping for is that the viewing audience gets the opportunity to realize that they are the answers to the question. Somewhere in that audience is the good cop that we often talk about, that rarely gets the spotlight shined on them. Somewhere in that audience is the good forensic scientist, the good person who is going to be a judge in the future, the good person who is looking to be a prosecutor and will be the prosecutor, the person who will be the future president of the United States. It's important because when you look at the life of a Yusef Salaam as it relates to the Central Park jogger case, as it relates to us being labeled as the Central Park Five, to then us being rebranded as the Exonerated Five, you're looking at us being able to smell the roses while we are alive, but also you're looking at us being able to give back and utilize our platform in a manner that allows other people to be brought back to life, right? What we're seeing all around the country and sometimes around the world is death. And the truth of the matter, my mother said this to me years ago. She said, everybody dies. Nobody gets out of here alive. And then I heard Les Brown say, live full and die empty. And so if everybody dies and a lot of us are waiting, a lot of us are hiding in plain sight in a manner similar to the way I came home from prison, not wanting anybody to recognize this over 6 foot tall individual, no longer with a flat top.
Right.
You know,
right.
But now having something to say, being able to tell people the words of a great philosopher like Cardi B, right? Fall down 9 times, get up 10.
Right, absolutely.
Where do you, can I ask you, Dr. Salaam, Toriano and I have had a chance to interview other people, innocent people convicted, sent to prison. I'm astonished at the grace that we hear from people who have gone through that experience, because I would be filled with rage. I mean, just absolute, how do you avoid that? How do you go through this nightmare and emerge on the other side as graceful as you are?
You know, you have to forgive those individuals who never will forgive you.
How do you, I mean, that's astonishing to me.
And I say that because, like, there's a reality in America which sees color as a crime. Therefore, we have to over excel. We have to overcompensate. We have to do more than just be the best, right? And then even in those moments, we're seen as criminal. And so for the people who are the decision makers that we have elevated to those positions, we then need to realize that if we want to truly be able to move forward with our lives, we have to forgive so that we can cut that ball and chain away from us so that we can move forward without the baggage. There's still damage, there's still harm that happened to us, but we have to be able to go into our future so that the next generation coming, as we pass that baton, we also pass us breaking generational curses.
Dr. Salaam, the recent death of George Floyd in Minnesota kicked off a series of nationwide protests, Black Lives Matter protests. Do you recall when you guys were going through your situation, mass protests in the streets of New York City?
There was protests. There was a lot of protests. There was a lot of people that made the connection immediately that this was a legal lynching. It wasn't until I got to the adult facility years later, 5 years after my prison bid started. I'm in the adult facility and I'm bumping into the elders, those individuals who had gone to prison long before I had even been born, who had still been there, never come home. They were telling me that I was a political prisoner. And it blew my mind because I never understood what that meant. I never realized the dynamics of that, you know. And there were protests on both sides. And oftentimes, the people who believed us, like our parents and our supportive members, you know, our sisters, our brothers, our cousins, our uncles, our aunts, our grandmothers, that was very, very small when it came to the tsunami of hate. Those people who really felt like, man, we really want to go to their homes and drag them from their beds and hang them from trees. That was the desire.
Absolutely.
You'd like to think, wouldn't you, Dr. Salaam, that this could not happen again, but that isn't reality, is it? I mean, that's what's the scariest thing of all, that what happened to you 30 years ago could easily happen again tomorrow.
You know, I got to tell you, The reason why something like this can happen again is because, as Dr. Angela Davis said, we as a people have historical amnesia. And I'm not talking about just Black folk.
Mm.
I'm talking about, as we teach history, we tend to clean history from the evils and the skeletons in the closet of history. We tend to paint the picture in a manner that disregards and discredits all of the truths about how we got here.
Well, not only that, but doesn't it, in your case, as we get farther away from it, you get the sense that some people say, well, it worked out okay, didn't it? You know, the real culprit was caught and they let him out of jail, and now look at Dr. Salaam. That really ignores the lessons from this.
I'm going to tell you
this tragedy as well, right?
One of the biggest lessons in that same thought, one of the biggest lessons in that thought has to be understood from this vantage point. Yes, the real perpetrator was caught, but because it was more sexy for there to be 5 brutes having raped a white woman, which was not the truth, there was no evidence at all that gave credence to that false narrative. But because that was what they wanted, it allowed for the real perpetrator to commit more crime. I mean, think about that. One of the last victims that he raped, he also murdered. She was a young, pregnant Latina woman. And as he says it, he went into her home, brandished a knife. She said, hey, can you just let me place my children in the next room? And he allowed her to do so. He then raped her when she came back and stabbed her to death. That young woman could be alive today had the system done its job. Had the system said something is just off about this case. And oftentimes there's things that are off about these cases, right? We went to prison for 7 to 14 years, some of us. There are people, when you think about the Innocence Project and the Innocence Networks of America, been in prison for decades. That is a crime in and of itself. That is a crime for people to be in prison. One person in prison for a crime that they didn't commit is one person too many.
That's absolutely true. Toriano?
Yeah, Dr. Salaam, watching the movie, the Netflix movie, When They See Us, was riveting for me. I've had conversation with other men that they told me they couldn't watch it. What was it like watching your story and the rest of the exonerated 5 stories being played out on basically a national platform?
It was tremendously traumatic and tremendously liberating. We falsely thought that we had all gone through the same experience. We didn't know each other's story in detail until we were able to sit down collectively and watch it for the first time. And then we understood why it was so devastating and how Corey went through his experience. He went in wanting to have my back. He went in as my ace in the hole. And he ended up freeing us all. And I'm not saying because we were freed, like we got freed 7 years later, most of us, but freeing us from the accusation because he survived. He survived long enough for the real perpetrator to see him and say, I got to tell the truth. He shouldn't be here. And his truth set us free.
Absolutely. Dr. Yusef Salaam, exonerated 5. We want to thank you for joining the Kansas City Star editorial board today. Thank you for taking the time out to talk to us about this important topic when you talk about criminal justice reform, dismantling systemic racism, and just overall lives, Black lives that matter. So thank you very much. Good luck with your appearance at the Midwest Innocence Project Faces of Innocence Gala.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on your show.
Thank you. Thank you. It's our pleasure.
I'm Toriano Porter for my colleague Dave Helen, Dr. Yusef Salaam. Thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you.